Technology Day uh, event being commemorated by Indian Institute of Petroleum in Dehradun. As Dr. Ray correctly observed, uh, we are we are in the middle of this COVID-19 crisis as we are, and so we're all thinking about uh, uh, how the life would change post COVID. The life is anyway is in transition because of technologies, because of we're transiting from the industrial era to knowledge era, and and then there are several things happening both nationally for us within the country, but also globally. Just as the COVID-19 pandemic has given us a major jolt, I think there is a bigger crisis that is being talked about for some time now. And all of us together in this world have to prepare for managing that crisis and kind of realizing a normal, realizing a framework, realizing a domain where everybody's aspirations can be met, but while all of us remain in harmony with the nature. What I'm talking about is the climate crisis. We have this International Framework Convention for Climate Change, and under that framework, countries have been meeting year after year to discuss this issue. And as the time elapsed, the gravity of the situation has been has dawning on everybody's mind much more intensely in later years than earlier years. And so much so that during the last meeting, uh, the terminology changed from just talking about climate change to talking about climate crisis. And I thought on a National Technology Day, I will pick up this topic because, as far as India is concerned, on this day, we we kind of moved to sort of ensure our national security. Then, of course, we moved forward. We had this civil nuclear agreement with several countries, and India was brought in the mainstream of nuclear commerce. And that was an important step towards our energy security. And I believe that with the climate crisis, the climate security challenge that the world faces now, again, I think nuclear has an important role. And that is what I'm going to discuss this in today's presentation. So the slide which is there in front of you, I hope everybody is able to see. This is the first slide after the introductory slide, or slide number 2. Now that actually, next one. This is the one. Now, this is a correlation between the energy consumption per capita on one side and the Human Development Index, which actually signifies the quality of life. And one can see that there is a correlation which all of us, I think most of us in energy business are well aware of. The point to note is on this correlation, where each dot represents a country, we can divide these countries roughly in 3 groups. The, the blue dots, which are at the top, which are more or less in a horizontal line near the top, those are countries where the quality of life is high and where the per capita energy consumption is more than 2,400 kilogram oil equivalent per capita. And in these countries, whether there is a little more addition to energy consumption, or for those who are way above 2,400 kilogram oil equivalent per capita consumption, even a significant reduction in energy consumption is not going to alter their human development index or quality of life. On the other hand, there are these countries closer to the y-axis towards the bottom of that figure, represented by green diamonds. These are countries with very low quality of life, and they are literally in a vertical line close to y-axis, meaning even a slightest access to energy addition would make a significant difference to their quality of life or human development index. And in between, you have these transition countries represented by red squares, where these are countries where economy is advancing, where energy consumption is growing. And these are countries, in fact, many of them are also the emerging economy countries. So these are countries which are actually, there is a huge demand for energy, there is a capacity to pay. And of course, they need energy, and in the today's context, they need non-fossil energy to move their quality of life towards human development index of 0.95 and be a part of the advanced countries in the world. Now, as far as India is concerned, I think let's remain on the previous picture. As far as India is concerned, we are at this moment roughly a factor of 4 or 3.5 below the 2,400 kilogram oil equivalent per capita threshold. And which means that if India wants to reach that high human development index, which is an aspiration which all of us would have, then we need to make sure that our energy access becomes 4 times or 5 times, because one is the multiplier on per capita energy consumption, plus the population growth that we expect would take place in India by I think there is some hum. I'll ask. I think there is a television running. Just a minute. अगर सुरेशा का आवाज कमी करना एको येतोय. Yes, sorry about that interruption. So the point I was making was that in India we need to increase the energy access by a factor of 4 or 5, and that would mean that total energy that we would require in our country whenever we reach that level, 2,400 kilogram oil equivalent per capita, our total energy requirement will rise to nearly 4 billion tons of oil equivalent, which is roughly 30% of the current global energy consumption. So the point that we in India need to recognize that for us to get access to energy commensurate with taking India to Human Development Index of 0.95 is going to be a huge challenge, both in terms of access to energy and also, of course, in terms of the climate impact that it would have if that access is in the form of fossil energy. Can we go to the next picture? Can we go to the next picture? Yes. Now, what we saw in the previous slide was a picture in the context of overall energy. Now, we use primary energy in different kinds, and good part of that primary energy we convert to electricity, and then that electricity we carry to consumers. We also use, for example, oil and gas we get from our wells and then process them and then reach the oil and gas to our consumers. So, see in primary energy context, the, I think there is an echo. There is an echo. Can the echo be brought down, please? Am I audible now? Echo has gone.
Yes, sir. I think Anil Sinha's mic was on.
Okay. So I'll continue. So what I was talking about was
Sorry, sir. Just a moment. We have an interference. We've identified the interference.
Yeah.
Dr. Sinha, please close your mic.
Shall we carry on?
No, sir. 1 minute, please, sir.
Hello, am I still on the line?
Yes, sir. We can hear you now.
Okay. So you tell me whenever I should carry on.
So you can resume now. Sorry about that.
Okay. No, not at all. So the point I was making was that if you think in terms of primary energy, then the largest quantum of primary energy is required for production of electricity. And then that goes for a variety of uses. The next big, of course, in that primary energy, coal is the major share, but so is the share for oil and hydro and in India's case also nuclear. And so I want to shift for a moment from total energy to electricity. And can we have that slide back, slide number 3? The correlation between Human Development Index and per capita electricity consumption. Can we get that slide?
Yeah, I think the slideshow has gone off. We'll just restore it.
Yeah.
1 minute.
Anyway, till the slide comes on, so that correlation that you will see on that slide between human development index and per capita electricity consumption has obviously the same shape as we saw in the previous picture, and the threshold seen, the 2,400 kilogram oil equivalent threshold that we saw in the previous picture, in the form of, in the context of electricity per capita electricity consumption, that threshold is at around 5,000 kilowatt hour per capita. And so when we talk about electricity, that is the threshold that we need to target. You may ask why I'm shifting to electricity. The reason is, of course, one reason I mentioned is about the uh, electricity being the largest primary energy consumer. But more importantly, with passage of time, the share of electricity in the overall energy use is bound to increase. And even more importantly, uh, electricity, just as it's a energy carrier, it can play a big role in terms of transformation of energy from one form to another. And as we go on to the newer energy world, that will become important. And I'll come to that towards the end of my presentation. Shall we go on to the next slide? Slide number 4. Are you able to get the slides now?
I think 1 more minute, some technical issue.
Yeah. Anyway, let me continue the explanation. And so the next slide is about I mentioned that this climate change, which has been in discussion for a long time, uh, suddenly in the last meeting, it got to be described as a climate crisis. And that is because at the Paris meeting, countries have kind of uh, made declarations, voluntary declarations about their actions in the context of climate mitigation. When all those kind of actions by different countries were factored in together, it was found that they are hardly adequate to kind of control the temperature rise to less than 2 degrees, which was being targeted at that point of time. It looked like more like 2.7 or closer to 3 degrees. And but on the other hand, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they brought out a report, and they felt that, in fact, even in the Paris, they had said so, that while we are targeting 2 degrees, you can go to the slide number 4, next one. One before. Yeah, this is the one. No, one before. Yeah, that's right. So they felt that IPCC came out with a report that we should really target 1.5 degrees because 2 degrees will not be sufficiently protective enough. And so the studies were made by IPCC and they came out with a report, IPCC special report on global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius, which says that we should aim at staying below 1.5 degrees temperature rise above the pre-industrial era. And the report also, as a part of their study, demonstrated that staying below 1.5 degrees by the turn of the century in the year 2100 will require emission cuts in emission of greenhouse gases uh, of 45% below the 2010 level by 2030 and to net zero by the year 2050. Now recognize that 2030 when it is saying you must go 45% below 210 level is only 10 years away, and 2050 by which time we should reach net zero is only 30 years away. So within this 10 years, we have to realize deep emission cuts and reach zero by in 30 years. Now, this is one kind of global target or objective before the entire world. And at the same time, there is a much larger part of the world, including India is a part of that world, where our aspirations are yet to be fulfilled. There is a lot of energy that will be required to realize our aspirations. So the question is, will the world be able to reach a uniform level of human development index or quality of life, or the disparity will get perpetuated? And we, of course, need quick actions because we have only time like 10 years and 20 years to realize this balance. And so these actions have to start now. And for that, we need to leverage available as well as rapidly deployable technologies. We have no time to talk about new development that will be converted to technology and deployed. That kind of gestation period we simply don't have. And so that is the crisis. Otherwise, the world will live in disparity, and a world in disparity can never remain peaceful. Now, one solution which all of us, the entire world has recognized is about renewable energy. Renewable energy is an important deployment option. Now, this is true. But there are studies which have said, for example, a report brought out by MIT in 2018, the report was titled The Future of Nuclear Energy in a Carbon Constrained World. There is another report which was brought out by IAEA again in 2018 on the climate change and nuclear power. And there the conclusion is that while renewable is an important deployment option and we must go on with it, nuclear power can make a vital contribution to meeting zero emission target while delivering the increasingly large quantities of base load electricity needed for global economic development. Now, there are, of course, concerns and sensitivity about nuclear energy, but the report warns that without nuclear contribution, the cost of achieving deep decarbonization targets increases significantly. And I'll come back to this after one slide. For the time being, let's go on to the next slide. The next slide is on actions that the world needs to take. Now, we had seen three groups of countries with high quality of life, and I mentioned there that even if they reduce electricity consumption significantly, and many advanced countries are actually doing so, their human development index is not likely to be affected. It's not going to come down. And also, of course, while they should do that and leave some space for other countries to fulfill their aspirations, they should also move ahead with decarbonization of electricity generation, whatever electricity is based on fossil energy. The second group of countries, the countries with average quality of life. Now, these are the countries which are the transition economies or emerging economies, and they have a huge demand, additional demand for electricity or energy. And this is where we need to significantly increase the non-fossil electricity consumption And as we have recognized, the world has made a lot of progress in the context of renewable energy, but we need to do more. And of course, also decarbonize the current electricity generation systems. Recognize that this will make a big difference to the average human development index in the world, because and these are the countries where they have the capability to pay for that additional energy demand, and as a result of the growth in their economy. So this is the main focus in terms of dealing with this climate change crisis. The third group of countries which are at very low level of quality of life or human development index, there of course I think there is a challenge about in terms of their ability to pay for the electricity consumption. And so I think the world as a whole, we must all think in terms of subsidizing energy supply, because as we saw, even the slightest increase in energy supply makes a huge difference to quality of life or human development index. And so I think the actions must be divided in three groups as are shown in this particular slide. Can we go on to the next slide, please? Now, on the other hand, what we see in the way world over it is happening, that despite Paris commitments, the carbon emission is actually increasing. For example, in this picture, you are saying the change in global energy related CO2 emissions and avoided emissions in the period 2017-18. Now, there has been emission increase because of the economic growth, as is seen there. And then the world has taken actions both by way of energy efficiency, renewable energy, coal to gas transition, nuclear, and many other factors. And so world has tried to reduce the emission, but the net result is that it has not been able to cope up with the increase in emission. And the net emission in 2018 was in fact higher than the emission in 2017. Now, this is a hard reality, and this is the challenge that we need to address. And India, being a large country and with largest kind of additional energy requirement, as I mentioned earlier, I think this becomes a especially big challenge for a country like India. Let's go on to the next slide, which is what should be our strategy for meeting the climate targets. Now, I have put situation in two countries, Germany and Japan. Both are, of course, advanced countries enjoying high quality of life. Both have a kind of commitment to environment. Both have made their pledges at Paris, but their strategies are vastly different. And I think from Indian perspective, we should understand what is behind the choices made by these countries. And there are, I think, important lessons for us in this picture. Let's begin with Germany. Germany, in the Paris Declaration, they said that by 2020, they would reduce greenhouse gas emission by 40%, reduce primary energy consumption by 20%, and increase the share of renewables in energy consumption to 20%. In fact, they are aiming at taking it to 50% overall. Germany produces something like 650 billion units of electricity at present. And they are on a massive program. In fact, Germany has, it's a nation that did more than any other to unleash the modern renewable energy industry, but in spite of all the efforts, they're likely to fall short of its goal for reducing the harmful carbon dioxide emission, even after spending over 500 billion euros by 2025 to overall its energy systems. Seen in rupee terms, the 500 billion euros translate to more than 40 lakh crore rupees. And that is for an electricity system of 650 billion units. Now look at in the context of India, today our electricity production is around 1600 billion units. And as I said, to reach the good quality of life, we should be targeting 5,000 kilowatt hour per capita. That seen in the context of stabilized Indian population will reach amount to something like 8,000 billion units. So this is something like 12 times larger than the current German electricity system. Now, overall of German electricity system to meet this target, if the 40 lakh crores are insufficient, you can well imagine how much money do we need to overall Indian electricity system to follow the German example. So, many people, they quote German example, and I think we should keep the cost factor in the picture. And that's exactly what that MIT study says. Let's come to Japan. Japan has a total electricity production today, which is in fact little less than double of Germany, 1100 billion units of electricity, out of which 15% they produce through renewable energy. In Paris, their declaration included the reduction of emission by 26% from the 2013 rates. Now, remember, Japan is a country where sensitivity about nuclear energy is the highest. They suffered the nuclear bombing at Hiroshima, Nagasaki, the only country in the world to suffer that. Even the sensitivity in Germany, which has kind of forced them to take those actions and the phase out plan for nuclear, is actually because of those bombing and the public feeling generated out of that. Japan is also the country which suffered the Fukushima accident. And in fact, as a result of that accident, there was again a global trauma in the nuclear field. Japan shut down all its nuclear power plants for carrying out a detailed safety review. And of course, after safety review, they are slowly and progressively bringing plants online one by one. Japan carried out a detailed review of their energy scenario in future. And in 2018, Japanese government revised its energy plan to update the 2030 targets for nuclear energy to 20 to 22%. Remember, before Fukushima, they were generating something like 30% from nuclear. But they still retain 20 to 30% of nuclear energy as a part of their mix, and that's the target for 2030. And this will be achieved by restarting the reactors. As I said, they have already restarted several of the reactors, and they progressively restart more reactors and reach 20 to 22%. As a part of their energy mix, they would also have renewables and 3% oil. Now, look at this big contrast. And we should also look at the very contrasting situations in which the two countries are. Germany is a part of the European electricity grid. So they can transfer electricity almost instantaneously, either bring in more electricity should there be a need, or export more electricity should there be excess. There are also a gas pipeline feeding Germany. Germany, of course, has significant coal on its own landmass, and there are, the European grid from where Germany can import has a significant part of nuclear energy in it. France, their neighbor, is very high on nuclear. Japan, in contrast, is an island country. It has huge energy needs because it's a much larger economy, and it has to ensure its energy security by ensuring that its supply lines remain safe, its sources of production from where they're accessing energy, they remain they remain operational, and also there is a question of storage, how much energy they can store, and uh, and so the energy mix which Japan would design to ensure its energy security is obviously of a very different kind. So I think it brings out very clearly that each country has to decide its own energy mix based on its own needs. And I think we should look at India's situation in that context. Let's move on to the next slide. And as far as electricity generation is concerned, as I said, to reach 5,000 kilowatt hour per capita, we would need something like 8,000 billion units of electricity to be provided in the country. Now, I recommend that out of this electricity, taking care of the grid stability and optimum mix expenditure, all that, I suggest that 50% of that could be from renewable energy, and 50%, of course, we want non-carbon energy to the maximum extent possible, but we should have necessarily 50% coming from base load plants. And of course, in the context of non-fossil base load plants, nuclear is the only option as far as India is concerned. So seen in that context, from the current 83 gigawatts of renewable energy production capacity in the country, we need to go up to 2,500 gigawatts, and which in turn would mean something like 30-fold increase in renewable. Now you look at the base load electricity generation. You would currently we are at around 282 gigawatts, and we need to go to something like 600 gigawatts, which would mean something like 30-fold increase in nuclear. And even then, we will not be able to reach all non-fossil baseload energy. We will be able to reach at least 70% electricity carbon-free coming from nuclear and also to some extent from hydro. And we will have to increase the rest of the energy coming from coal by increasing new plants as well as by replacing the plants which will get phased out, because we have a lot of old coal plants which would need to be replaced. And so what about carbon emission coming out of that? And what we'll need to do is to actually devise strategies to recycle carbon dioxide and utilize the products coming out of that recycle, so that we don't allow that carbon dioxide going into environment. And that way we can cut down the emission, but still manage our needs in a cost-effective way. Shall we go on to the next slide? The Indian Nuclear Energy Program.
Yes, sir. There is some disturbance.
Yeah.
Mr. Sudeep Ganguly, please stop your mic. Mr. Sudeep Ganguly, please come.
Yes, sir.
Please remove him.
Yeah.
Moderator, please remove him.
Yeah. Okay, so let us, in that context, look at the Indian nuclear power program. Today, we are generating hardly the total generation from nuclear in the country is just 6.7 gigawatts. All power plants added together, which are under construction already, that will add to another 6.7 gigawatts. We have a large number of plants, 12 units approved by government to be constructed in fleet mode. And the work has started, money has been sanctioned. and that will add another 9 gigawatts. And there are more units in planning, particularly coming out of the International Civil Nuclear Cooperation, which we have been talking about with several countries. And that should add to something like 26 gigawatts. So recognize that this all put together will add to only around 50 gigawatts, 49.18 gigawatts to be precise. Now, this is this is still one fourth of the target that we talked about in the previous slide, and that is still inadequate in terms of decarbonizing totally at generation level. That's why I was talking about decarbonizing at CCU level. But I think the clear message is that nuclear power plant has to be accelerated. It has to do more than what it is doing. I wouldn't like to venture when the 63 gigawatts, which is the target, will be achieved. And nor I would like to venture to say when the 200 gigawatts would achieve. But to my mind, that's absolutely important. Now, let's go on to the next slide. Now, I would like to now come back to the total energy scene. We talked about electricity, and but let's look at the total energy scene now. Now, electricity is only a carrier of energy from coal. In India, we produce electricity mostly from coal or other sources. But in many other countries, it's a carrier of energy from oil-fired power plants, or there are some large biomass power plants, or even solar and wind. The carrier is electricity. Now, the new towards as we are moving towards the new future, we are recognizing that we have to also think about decarbonizing at the demand end. And so several uses of energy, for example, mobility is a big example. Electric mobility is becoming important and everybody is talking about it. Now, similarly, there are, even creature comfort wise or other segments which are which produce more money compared to what we are traditionally doing. In all those segments, electricity is important. And so share of electricity going forward would certainly increase. Share of oil, which is the next big kind of primary, that is the source we derive from primary energy. That going forward, actually trend is it is growing and I don't see how we can bring it down. But realistically, we should make all attempts to bring that share down. And this is a big challenge, not very easy. We will talk about in a moment about what we should do about this. But this is a big challenge. I think the share of gas in our economy must go up. Globally, share of gas is much larger than the share of gas in India. And internationally, outlook for gas is actually a little better than outlook for oil. So from all points of view, and oil, of course, gas is cleaner than oil. So from all points of view, we should increase the share of gas. So that should be emphasized. And of course, solid fuel must be necessarily de-emphasized. And this actually means a lot of technologies, which we'll have to emphasize on. And I think several activities are on different sectors. They are making their contribution in these directions, whether it's agriculture, industry, and all others, commercial, residential, transport, and etc. Now, what are these efforts that we need to put in? New thrust areas to decarbonize energy use. I mentioned about electric mobility because I think transportation is one big kind of user of energy, primary in the form of oil primarily, but also some gas. And electric mobility, even if it comes from carbon, and even if it means that it may not help so much towards the clean energy future, but it will help a lot in terms of reduction of import. Uh, Same thing is true about the hydrogen electric mobility, in the sense you could produce hydrogen through conventional means, or you could produce hydrogen from biomass, you could produce hydrogen from solar and nuclear, and so the hydrogen could in fact be non-fossil hydrogen, and you could have electric vehicle which are driven or which are powered by fuel cells, and that in turn powered by hydrogen. And if you do that, I think there is reason to believe that this will reach break even much sooner than other options. And this hybrid would actually overcome the range limitation which we see in the context of electric mobility, and also is particularly suited for heavy vehicle transport, both passenger and going forward the goods transportation. The surplus agricultural residue is an important factor, and I think it is large enough to replace, equivalent of the total gasoline consumption in the country. And there are a lot of efforts on 2G ethanol, and I think efforts must be made to bring that to a cost-effective level. Right now, it's going forward on the basis of subsidy. Can't go on for too long like that, and so that's a major technology thrust. Coal to fuel, fluid fuel, both oil as well as gas. This also, I believe, is extremely important because this would help us reduction of import bill, which is one of the major challenge in our country. I mentioned about solar, nuclear, biomass converted to hydrogen, and you can do so particularly because all renewable energy, most of it except biomass, would produce electricity. Nuclear produces electricity, and so if you want to convert that to hydrogen, you could use electricity and use steam electrolysis to produce hydrogen, but you could also use high temperature and do the thermochemical splitting of water. And I think these are major technology thrusts where work is going on, but much more is required to reach a commercial break even at the earliest possible time. I mentioned about carbon capture and utilization, and as I said, dependence on coal, completely avoiding it to me is unthinkable in near future. And that would mean that you want to go to kind of the clean energy future in spite of using coal, you must develop technologies for carbon capture and utilization. And in that, of course, for example, utilization like enhanced oil recovery in oil wells is an important choice. But also one could use non-fossil hydrogen to convert CO2 or CO2 carbon monoxide mixture into usable substances, both for energy as well as for petrochemicals. Non-fossil heating and refrigeration applications are important, it's obvious. And of course, in spite of the fact that we must put in bigger effort in terms of electric mobility and all, as I said, I don't think, first of all, the demand for the petroleum fuel will come down anytime soon. But even if that happens, I think in terms of petrochemicals, we are actually a net importer. We import much more than what we can export. And so it's important that we enhance our petrochemical production by making flexible refineries. And in doing so, I think we'll ensure, we'll make sure that our energy security is not compromised. But at the same time, we should aim at becoming net exporter of petrochemicals. So these are several technology challenges that we need to overcome to move towards the future of clean energy. I would I come to the last slide, and I would just draw your attention to these three reports. I had the good fortune of chairing the committees for making all the three reports, and they are available on the internet. So if anybody wants more reading of, you can certainly download that and take it further. So with this, I conclude, and I thank you for a very patient hearing. I hope it has gone across because I do see some audio issues in the communication. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We're sorry about the couple of minor audio issues, but it came across very clearly for the better part. And thank you also for having some slides ahead. We will now open it up to Q&A from the panel that is on WebEx, and after that we will open up the Q&A to Facebook. So we will invite the members on WebEx to first ask their questions. Maybe Dr. Malhotra, would you like to make any comments? Or Dr. Garg? Deep Singh, especially since there was so much mention of coal, you would like to say a word? Dr. Malhotra, yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, it was an excellent, must compliment. As always, Dr. Vangi Kakurkar has been able to throw good light on what is required in this country. And I think he has summed up very well. So I think no more questions, but only thing is that I was thinking that the cost of, when he compared with Germany and the amount required for that much of renewable energy, the figure which I just noted, 40 lakh crore for 650 BU, and that's enormous cost. I don't know whether we'll be able to incur that, but our renewable energy plan has been going very aggressively. So that's one
correct.
One thing which
that's right. No, I think that's very very correctly said, and it must go on with even higher aggression, because that's something where country is doing quite well.
Yeah. I think India would be doing it perhaps at much lower cost, I believe. I don't know.
That is right. I think anything we do in high technology is at a lower cost.
Yeah, that's right. Because we can't afford that much of cost, the figure which is there in Germany.
Yeah, but I only want to point out that, of course, those are German costs, and the 500 billion euros is the German program.
Yeah.
But the ratios are in orders of magnitude between Indian program and German program. That's the point.
Yeah, that's right.
I thought that the comments about coal were particularly interesting, Dr. Kakurkar. I'm wondering if Director SIMFA, Dr. Pradeep Singh, might have a few things to say on India's coal imperatives.
Yeah. Hello. Yes.
Hello. Yes, Dr. Pradeep, we can hear you.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Pradeep Singh, you went back on mute again. Please unmute yourself. Dr. Pradeep Singh, you are muted. Abhishek.
Hello.
Bole, Dr. Saab, we can hear you now.
Yeah, sir, just call to just first of all, it was a very eye-opening lecture as usual. Dr. Kakurkar, he was keynote speaker in our energy conference. Coal to fluid fuel, there is a lot of potential, and just I wanted to update that Niti Aayog wanted that there should be a database so that the coal gasification potential of India should be identified.
Yeah.
And I am happy to communicate that the data has been generated, and SIMFA has submitted the report to Niti Aayog regarding the potential gasification potential of Indian coal. And SIMFA is in process already. It has been 90% work has been done. 1.5 ton per day coal to syngas plant is ready. It will be just because of the COVID, it is delayed, but by September, we will be able to show that we are converting coal to syngas of 1.5 ton.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
1.5 ton per day.
Dr. Pradeep Singh, I have a follow-up question to that. Given that gasification is intrinsically energy intensive, that means you're using part of the energy that you produce to run the gasifier itself. Is it not possible to find a way to combine gasification with something renewable, like maybe for gasification using solar thermal steam as one of the energy inputs, solar thermal energy as one of the energy inputs, some way of mitigating the carbon footprint of gasification itself?
Just remember, Dr. Anjay, when the last RC, you suggested this, and our research team is collaborating with your scientists on this. And we are in the process to establish and to go this route also.
Thank you. Maybe I also see Dr. I think Dr. Tiwari's mic is on. Yeah. Kakurkar Saab, maybe your comment, you were about to respond.
Well, first of all, let me come back to that. I think it's nice to hear the Simfer progress, which we just heard. 1.5 ton plant ready for gasification. That's wonderful. And as I said, there are different people. In an international meeting, you make even a little articulation of that. There'll be eyebrows. Oh, you are using coal and you should not be doing that and all. But I think we should just tell them that in India, we cannot do without coal. And for us, of course, that we are concerned with carbon dioxide emission and that we'll deal with it through CCU route. But reduction of import cost is a very important thing. So, and coal is a huge resource. So, while we understand the world thrust towards moving away from coal, I think we must emphasize that for India, moving along the coal is very important.
Sir, just I wanted to update you. Can you listen, sir?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. In the last week, Niti Aayog has constituted a committee, and the Simfer is part of that, to convert 100 million ton of coal by surface gasification. And places has been identified based on our data, the coal potential gasification, whatever the data we have submitted. Based on that data, the Niti Aayog under the chairmanship of Professor Dr. V.K. Saraswat, a committee last week was constituted where there is a plan to convert 100 million ton of coal to syngas.
100 million ton per year?
Per year.
Okay, very good.
Maybe Dr.
Happy to
Tiwari.
hear this development.
Dr. Tiwari, would you like to comment especially on unconventional resources that we talked about? You have to speak your phone. Or put your phone on. Now you have gone on mute. Yeah. आपका कुछ आ रहा है आपका फोन आप फोन से बात कर रहे हैं क्या उनको unfortunately either we are getting your echo or we are not able to hear you. Are you using your phone for or is your phone also anyway, maybe we'll go on to Dr. Kannan. Dr. Kannan, maybe you have some comments, particularly with marine resources and energy.
Actually, it was a fantastic lecture on the broader energy scenario. I just wanted, on the biomass side, he was also mentioning about the petrochemicals as a kind of a very important alternative. What is his take of making petrochemicals from the biomass? petrol-based, kind of like petrochemical from biomass?
I have a very different take, not a very considered opinion. It's more on the basis of what I hear from other people. But I think, see, biomass, for example, if you go to US and other countries, biomass-based energy is a big thing, but that was actually based on felling trees and dividing that into smaller pieces and burning that to produce energy. Now we should not be talking about that kind of biomass in our country, because that means actually creating harm to our forests. What we should focus on is only what I say surplus biomass. So surplus agricultural residue, and that there is a report available. So there is sufficient biomass to be converted to 2G ethanol, for example, which is equivalent of the total gasoline consumption in the country. Now that doesn't interfere with anything. Now I recognize that biomass can be also used for petrochemicals, but something in me tells me that producing petrochemicals is a good way of fixing carbon. So I think we should, to me, I'm not too sure how the economics plays out, but while biomass, I think we won't have in such a large quantity. And so I would prefer to use crude to support petrochemical industry, because there is a huge import-export deficit for us. And do that in flexible refineries so that there will be fluctuations on fuel. Sometimes we will think that but we will require much more fuel and vice versa. But if we are able to sort of convert all that balance into petrochemicals, and petrochemicals is something where there's a huge domestic demand, I think you can get much higher energy security. And biomass is not that large in comparison, not accounting for the forests, not accounting for, biomass which has other uses. So I would, in fact, I don't very much favor biomass even for power generation when it comes to burning biomass, because there are other ways of doing it. Although it may be cheaper, it may be, consistent with the clean energy requirements, but I think that's not a good idea. But that's my take, and as I told you, it needs to be tested out on the professional rigor, which I have not done so far.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tiwari. Shall we try one more time? Were you able to sort out the problems at your end? I think we lost him, did we? Dr. Tiwari, maybe I can. I think is Dr. Umay. Tiwari sir, somebody else is with you. Is there anybody else in the room with you? Because we're getting an echo as if there is a second user. नहीं, अब तो कोई साउंड नहीं आ रहा है आपका, फिर से म्यूट हो गया है.
Okay.
There is a problem, unfortunately. All right, Dr. Saab, sorry, we will have to leave you on mute. I think we have time for one last question. Is Dr. Garg still online? I know he had dialed in. I don't see him online. And anybody else, one last person to ask one last question, after which we'll hand over to Neha for the Facebook questions. Neha, are you ready with the Facebook questions? Neha? You're on mute. Let me see if I can read you the questions from Facebook. Sir, I have one question for you before we go on to the Facebook questions. So So one question I have is on the public perception of the nuclear option.
Yes. Yeah, this is certainly a major challenge. But there are some positive signs of late, because for example, countries like United Kingdom, for example, after they ran out of North Sea oil, they have been trying to kind of set up nuclear power plants, and public opinion there has become more favorable than it was earlier. So that's a positive thing. There are, for example, a country like United Arab Emirates, UAE. Now that country is it's a Middle East country, oil country. Of course, oil is running out. For example, the Dubai has run out of oil completely. So they are setting up a nuclear power plant close to commissioning now. And so they have recognized that in spite of the fact that they have access to cheap energy, nuclear is certainly a part of future, and they are doing that. So there are such changes, and there are actually issues. One is, of course, the accident caused at Fukushima or Chernobyl or before that 3 Mile Island. And the way nuclear operates, its safety standards are so high that, for example, Fukushima, there was a lot of displacement, but there was no fatality and hardly any radiation injury. Nobody suffered from radiation injury. But it leaves a trauma. And so slowly there is realization that I think one has to kind of go closer to realism and meet. Because, for example, if you really look at the risks in objective terms, nuclear is very safe, but that is not the way public would perceive. And this is changing. Slowly it is changing. But at this moment, this is a problem. This is certainly a problem, and we need to be engaged with people.
Thank you, sir. So as a message, your closing message to our scientists and the scientist community that is hearing this, keeping in mind that there is the theme of this year being rebooting the economy through science and technology, what would be the 3 things that you would want the scientists who are listening to you to do or to adapt in their approach for the science and technology future of India?
Well, first, of course, I think, as I said in my lecture, we must find Indian solutions to Indian challenges, because solutions acquired from abroad are not necessarily the optimum solutions. And this, I think, there is enough experience to show that. So I think Indian, at least as far as the scientific community is concerned, I would say we must think Indian. The second key point that I would say is, the problems that are there before us. We should be little more aggressive in solving those problems. Many of these things don't have a shortcut. These are all harder approaches. But I think technology is about pursuing hard approaches. So there are no shortcuts to this, and we must solve. And I think given the Indian capability, there is nothing in my view that Indian scientific community cannot solve. So that is the second important point. And the third point is the Indian situation. I'm going away from energy but for example, there are huge disparities in our country. Our rural domain is still the larger domain in terms of population compared to the urban domain. Per capita income there is just half, or of the urban domain. Why is it that we don't create new jobs consistent with the new era? You have this knowledge technologies, disruptive technologies, lot of these exponential technologies are on the corner, and they can be all handled by young people provided they are educated well, and this actually requires less capital according to me compared to the technologies of industrial era. And so I many times I'm at a loss why we have given such a low priority to do capacity building of our youth in rural areas. Of course, youth in urban areas, we have to do capacity building, but more so for youth in rural areas. And that applies to every area. It applies to education, it applies to energy, it applies to agriculture and value addition, it applies to water. And these are all, according to me, high technology areas. And so scientific community must figure out what are these challenges. And I'm talking about grounded challenges which are absolutely high-tech. And I'm convinced that one can do world-class research in handling these challenges. And that is what I would urge on today's Technology Day. I am so glad that I got this opportunity to speak before this community, and I'm so happy that so many labs and the directors of the labs are also a part of this webinar. But I think together, I truly believe that there is nothing that we cannot solve. And I think that is what I would like to say on technology. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. With those very encouraging words, we are also kicking off our annual symposium, which we call Sustainable Energy Futures, Challenges and Opportunities.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And for the CEFCO program, it will continue. We will be putting out announcements on Facebook and on the IIIT.
Excuse me, sir. Before we end up this program, we have some questions from our Facebook viewers. Can I ask, please?
Go ahead, Neha.
Sir, one of the participants, Satya Yadav, is asking about the economy of syngas produced from the coal.
Well, shall I respond?
Yes, sir, please. You're welcome to respond.
Yeah. See, economy, we should be judging under Indian conditions. And that judgment should start after you have developed technology to some scale. Anything at lower scale, if you compare with the commercial world, then you are actually creating a barrier to even development of that idea. So I do believe that while economy is important, but at the idea plane, I think we should keep all options open. When we have a proof of concept, we should take it to a demonstration level or a prototype level where we should prove the technology becoming robust. And it is at that time, which is something like 1/10 the commercial scale or thereabouts, that we should estimate the cost under Indian conditions with the commercial costs and decide to take further action. And if, of course, it's found to be not viable commercially, we cannot proceed. That's very clear. But trying to look at the comparison of a process in development with the commercially established processes is actually creating a barrier to development. And I would strongly suggest that we should never do. India is a large enough country to support multiple developments.
Thank you very much, sir, for your answer, and I hope our participant is satisfied with this. And sir, may I take your permission to ask the next question, just last question from you, from one
Sure.
of our participants? Yeah.
Sure.
The next question is, since all the countries are possessing high values in living standard graph, so which have a significant increase in solar energy in last few years. So do you believe solar energy can make a big difference in future?
Well, solar energy would certainly make a big difference in future because, the integrated value of total solar potential is indeed very large. The problems are two. One is solar energy is actually diffused. If you see the energy transitions, we have moved from, wood, or before that, wind and water, and then we moved to oil, gas, nuclear. So we are actually moving towards more and more concentrated energies. Contrast that with renewable energy. Renewable energy is very, very diffuse, and which in turn would mean that for large scale use of renewable energy, we require large landmass to collect that energy. Not that that mass is not there, but one needs to think through the impact of relative landmass utilization for multiple purposes, including energy. And with renewable energy, that proportion will go very large. Now, that is one issue. The another big issue is the solar or renewable energy, solar and wind both. They are variable energies, and you cannot have 100% grid running on variable energy, even if you say that we'll develop cheap battery technologies and things of that kind, because the costs involved are going to be prohibitively high. So, for example, as we saw, if countries where the renewable energy penetration is high, the experience is that while the project proponent have made quite a competitive business out of this energy, but the public, the governments had to pay much higher resources to take care of the system costs, grid costs, and many of the, for example, fossil energy plants had to back down, so there is a cost associated with that, and all that translates into money, and that is what you saw in the case of Germany, that high cost that you see, and that is a factor which cannot be ignored. So the short point is solar energy is important. Solar energy can make a big difference, but there is an optimum proportion for solar, wind, and other baseload non-fossils that we must respect. Otherwise, the costs would become unaffordable, particularly for poorer countries.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, sir, for enlightening us with your answer. And thank you very much for your talk today. Now I'll hand it over to our Director CSR IIP, Dr. Anjan Ray, for the concluding remarks.
Thank you, Neha. I don't think we'll be doing any concluding remarks in that sense. This is just to let all our audience, including Dr. Kakodkar, know that the Sustainable Energy Futures, Challenges and Opportunities Symposium that we normally hold on Technology Day will now be a kind of a month-long celebration with daily events, which we will post from time to time on Facebook. And it will end on World Environment Day, the 5th of June, with a full-length virtual seminar, which will be, whose highlight will be a panel discussion by Mr. Sanjeev Singh, outgoing chairman of Indian Oil, with our former directors and RC members. So we invite you all to join again on that date, and in between to keep an eye on our Facebook page for daily quizzes, competitions, and other announcements. Again, a big thanks to Mr. Kakodkar. I would ask everybody to give him loud virtual applause by unmuting your mics for a moment.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
To join again. Thank you all. Take care. Bye-bye.